Welcome to my podcast, From Illness to Awakening. I'm Allison Bruner. I am a somatic psychotherapist and a shamanic energy healer, as well as someone who has coped with and overcome more than 8 years of chronic illness. It is my heartfelt desire to offer this channel as a way to support you, to support others through your process of chronic illness as a path to spiritual upleveling, whether or not that leads to healing of your physical body. My story began actually more than 8 years ago. I experienced adrenal fatigue, chronic thyroid issues, well in advance of the 8 years that I refer to that began, I think, was one of the biggest dark nights of the soul of my life. The earlier experiences with illness, I think they were warnings or just kind of, I was getting a taste of what was to come. They were warnings about, that I didn't understand how, and they did, pointed to places within me that I had not yet healed on an emotional level. I was able to get temporary help with those issues through integrative medicine, but because of continued emotional issues and unhealed trauma years later, which was about the year 2015, these issues really flared up, made a comeback, and became the focal point of my life, took up so much room in my life that I couldn't ignore them. In 2015, I had also what to me was the biggest spiritual awakening of my life. And I had set some intentions that year that I wanted to embody more of my higher self, that I really wanted to be in service in a bigger, more profound way. I was already a psychotherapist, and I had a sense that there was so much more that I was here to do, so much more that I was able to do. I just wasn't exactly sure what that looked like, what that felt like, or how that would unfold. And I believe that the prayers I spoke were answered, but not in the ways that I'd hoped. Of course, I had no idea that it was going to lead to some of the darkest and most challenging years of my life. So I started to experience some physical issues, like interstitial cystitis, and very, very intense menstrual cycles that later on would lead to endometriosis. I'm trying to remember everything. There was some copper toxicity from birth control. But at the same time, I was also experiencing a bit of a spiritual high like I had never known. There had been a Kundalini awakening that was helping me to, or leading me to, a feeling of oneness with everything, and a real opening in my heart. Some very intense feelings around love for the earth, love for other human beings. And for the first time in my life, I was very kind of addicted to being in nature. I was traveling every single weekend, usually back and forth Saturday and Sunday on the weekends to the Jersey Shore. I lived in Philadelphia at the time. And then when it was too cold to go to the beach, I was hiking. And I had never done that before in my life. And I felt like I couldn't get enough of it. And I also felt, well, I'll back up a little bit. I was becoming more and more sensitive, not only personally sensitive, but I was already sensitive my entire life, but I was also becoming more and more sensitive to the energies around me and to other people's emotions. So I was in need of grounding, and I craved being out in nature, but I also loved the feeling of love that I felt when I was out hiking or sitting on the beach or connecting with the ocean. But in traveling back and forth to the Jersey Shore from Philadelphia, it was very difficult. I remember my bladder would feel so much pain and get and start to swell, and I would have to stop to go to the bathroom three times each way to and from um, the shore, and had a lot of physical pain. The compulsion to go, though, was so strong. I would just sort of put up with it. Um, by and the awakening started to happen early in the year in 2015, but by late summer, early fall, this depression started to set in. And I didn't know why or how, and I didn't understand quite where it was coming from. But the way that I see it now, in my clairvoyance, I can see that so much light had come into my field, into my biofield, into my physical body, that helped to awaken me, but it also shed so much light on anything that was left over in my shadow, in my underworld, that I had not yet looked at. All of the unhealed wounds and aspects of self that I had pushed into my subconscious were illuminated, and all in need of being integrated. I I also see that all of that light that had come in affected me on a physical level. It's as though anything in my physical body that was not in resonance with that light had to be purged. It it catalyzed this massive years long purging. Um, so as I was saying, by late summer, early fall, I was starting to feel more and more depressed, and more and more unable to cope with living in a big city. And I started to think about and dream of where else I could possibly live. I felt like I needed to move to a place where I could be surrounded by green, by trees, by hills and mountains, by water. That was exactly what I needed. And I kept setting my sights on places like upstate New York, and or even closer to the ocean. But what also happened simultaneously is the life that I had known for 17 years in Philadelphia started to crumble. I had a private psychotherapy practice, and it had always been that every time a client was starting to complete their process and no longer be in need of the services that I offered, um, as that would happen, I just in time I'd hear from someone else who wanted to come in and work with me. But as my clients were starting to feel like their process was complete with me, I was no longer getting new clients. And so my practice started to crumble. And the writing was on the wall. You know, I could no longer afford my rent and my utilities. I thought that I was going to increase my income and save enough money to move away, to a new place that I had dreamed about. But in fact, what happened was I started to run out of money, and I had to move home. I had to move back in with my parents. And at the time, I thought I had failed, though there was a part of me that kind of always knew that this was all unfolding the way it was for a reason. Um, thank goodness I was pushed back home. Thank goodness everything unfolded the way it did, because I didn't understand or know yet that I was going to be going through chronic illness, and I needed to pull in, uh, and rely on other resources for some time. So um, I'll fast forward to moving in with my parents, and starting a new private practice in another county in Pennsylvania. I was starting to get sick. I didn't know it though. I just I was experiencing neurological weirdness. I was having brain zaps. It felt like a swishing in my head. My vision was getting a little bit funky, a little bit blurry. I could no longer stand artificial lights. I'm still sensitive to them, but not like I was back then. Um, Loud sounds. I couldn't stand people laughing too loud. I couldn't even stand the kind of chaotic noises that children make. Um, I couldn't stand to be in crowded places. Some of this was empath overwhelm because, like I said, I was the most sensitive that I had been in my entire life. Some of this was also neurological. And so driving, I would go to my office. I would drive to my office, which was about 43 minutes from my parents' house, my new office, and see clients. I could only see 3 clients per day, sometimes only 2. And as I would drive home at night, I just felt so uncomfortable in my head and really tired. It was like I'd hit a wall as soon as the sun set and have to get home and go to bed. What I really started to notice in short time was that when I tried to clean my room, clean the space I occupied, the 3rd floor of my parents' home, and when I would try to clean or get ready and take the train to Philadelphia to visit friends, a boyfriend at the time as well, I could not complete an entire task without having to take a break, sit down, sometimes lie down. I was in a bit of denial though. I um I just there was a part of me that didn't want to admit that something was off. That something was not quite right. And so I would try to push myself and ignore the fatigue and discount it. I should have known better. I had experienced adrenal fatigue and hypothyroidism years prior. They healed, but I had so many plans, so many ideas for my business, for what I wanted to do with my life going forward. And so I kind of just stayed in a state of denial and kept trying to override my physical body's needs and signals. Um, and so I got myself to the point by March of 2017 that I was able to move out of my parents' home and into a home that where the land, I know that I was meant to be there because where I moved for me was like Eden. It was like the Garden of Eden. And I know in retrospect that that was where I was going to do the majority of my healing and also undergo training as an apprentice to my shamanic guide in the mystical Andean tradition. Um, the I moved in and set up my house, and about a month into living there, I was trying to schedule all of I had tried to start a dance class. It was like somatic psychotherapy through dance. I was trying to set up moon circles and all kinds of things, meditation groups. Um, and I was trying to make new friends. I was in a new county, trying to live my life as I had been. But what kept happening was like around 7 o'clock at night, I would hit that wall again and need to go to sleep. And then, and so this was spring and into summer. And then we had the solar eclipse of, gosh, was that August or September of 2017? As soon as that happened, it was like a reset of my life. And in the aftermath, I could no longer ignore that something was off. And as soon as the sun would start to set, it was like something would shut off in my body. I could not stay awake. And as we moved into winter and the sun would set earlier and earlier and earlier, it was clear to me that I needed help. I was going to bed earlier and earlier every night, and I was sleeping about 12 or 13 hours a night. So I had shared my experience with some other people, and after hearing 3 times from others that they recommended and had experienced the positive effects of doing the following the protocols of medical medium Anthony William, I thought, okay, I have to try it. So I started doing his detoxes, his cleanses, and trying to follow a plant based diet. And I know now what I didn't know back then is that it had started working, but that I was detoxing so much that as it was leaving, I just felt so sick. There was so much going on. Not only that, I was having to heal on an emotional level. I was doing so much inner work as well. You're probably wondering at this point, why hasn't she gone to a doctor? And I left that out of the story because for 2 years leading up to this, I had been going to doctors and they just had no answers. They told me that, oh, it's probably your hormones. You're probably stressed out. You probably need an antidepressant. But they offered nothing. Western medicine offered nothing of help, and nothing was changing. And in fact, I was getting tested. My thyroid was fine. I was getting physical examinations. Nothing was coming up. Also, I was gaining a lot of weight very quickly, and Western medicine doctors were saying, "Oh, it's just age," and they wanted to put me on Weight Watchers. And I was like, "Wait a minute." I actually eat cleaner than Weight Watch. I actually ate very clean for many years prior. So going on Weight Watchers wouldn't make any sense, because they allowed for microwave meals, and I didn't. Personally, I found microwave meals to be unhealthy, and I didn't eat sugar. I wasn't going to count points. So I looked online for natural medicine practitioners in my area and started seeing them. But before I get further into the story, which I'll leave for later, and kind of weave in guidance and insight that I collected along the way through my experience. I was along the way diagnosed with chronic fatigue, and then eventually, as things worsened, fibromyalgia. But I'll get more into that later. Right now, what I want to say is that in those years, which now we're kind of getting to early 2018, or maybe just prior, and all the way into late 2023, what this entire experience forced me to do was slow way down. Prior to all of this happening, I was a social butterfly, a Gemini sun, an Aries moon, very passionate, very out in the world. Even though I'm an introvert, I could really appear to the outer world as someone who's very social and loved to interact with people, be fast paced. But this, at some point, did have me mostly bedridden and with nothing that I could do but meditate, reflect, pray, journal, and on my best days, go out. I would drive out to my favorite places in nature and just sit or walk very slowly, or sometimes just sit in the car and stare at a lake and start to interact more with the natural world, the spirit world, and do, as I said earlier, a lot of inner work. I was working with my shamanic guide, sometimes weekly, sometimes every other week, depending on her schedule, but as much as I could and as much as I could afford. And so a lot transformed and changed in me in the next several years at a very, very fast rate. And by the way, I had been in psychotherapy since I was a child. I even had, in my opinion, one of the best psychotherapists in the United States. She was so amazing. She was the reason I became a therapist. Her work was so effective and hard to find. She was a somatic psychotherapist in the Hakomi method. And it was because I had seen so much of a benefit, so much change in me. I felt like had I not met her, had I not done that work, I'd have been institutionalized. Um, so I became a therapist because of that work. It was so inspiring to me. I felt like I had to give back. But now, through chronic illness, I was really having to turn inward and inward and inward and inward and meet myself. I shed so many layers that I had of false selves that I had put up, which is what we all do, right? In order to feel like I was lovable, to get accepted, to hide the most vulnerable places inside of me. And through the awakening process, so many of those false selves were removed. And I was very, very afraid then and very protective of the more, the pure aspects of me. Um, and yeah, just was kind of holed up in my home in this place that was like the Garden of Eden. So there were many blessings on the journey and a lot of struggle, a lot of emotional pain, grief. There were two aspects of my journey. One in which I felt a lot of despair, grieving my old life. And then there was this other part of me that just knew and trusted I was exactly where I needed to be. And I was also very fortunate to be apprenticing to a woman who had had her own shamanic sickness that she overcame on her path. She had been paralyzed, I believe, from the waist down for 3 years. It was through the work that she had done um, in training that she was able to heal herself and then become a guide and a teacher and a medicine woman. So I kind of always knew that I was going to heal my body. But I also had to learn to let go of any agendas and even accept that possibly my life journey could include physical illness until my dying day, and to let that be okay and no longer identify with being someone who was physically ill. As I said earlier, I'm still not a fan of artificial light, and the sun is setting here, so I'm going to try and wrap things up very quickly. I have an outline I'm just going to refer to here to make sure I cover what I wanted to cover, and I'll continue in future episodes. It's like a TV show. But yeah, I learned how to trust. That took a long time. I learned how to let go. Again, that took most of the 8 years. I learned how to love myself. I learned to become more empowered. And I had a real challenging time for a while letting go of the consciousness of victimhood, and even more so of rescuing. I was always a rescuer, but something that chronic illness teaches you is to stop taking care of others and put yourself first. It took me time, but I got it eventually. And I learned patience, and also getting more and more comfortable with being vulnerable, with asking for help. I think one of actually the hardest part of it all was not even being physically uncomfortable, though, especially with endometriosis, that was a big part of it. That was terrifying. The physical pain would get so bad, and also, just nearly bleeding to death and having to go to the hospital and get a blood transfusion is pretty terrifying. But that wasn't even the worst part for me. The worst part was the 65 pounds of weight gain and all of the body shame I had to heal. So I had to heal my identification with my physical body, and believing that the only way to be accepted in love was through physical appearance. So that really changed. And I went from always hiding to forcing myself out into the world to eventually not thinking about it so much and going back to holding moon circles and women's groups. Um, but let's see, what else? I, in future episodes, I'm really hoping to interview other people who have been through chronic illness, whether or not they've healed it, what it's taught them, how they cope with it, and also with some um, natural or alternative medicine practitioners, maybe even allopathic medicine practitioners, because everyone plays a role. But what I want to do right now is thank you so much for listening. I hope that even though this has been all about my experience thus far, that it's been helpful in kind of validating your experience and also the path of not knowing, like, what is happening to me, not having clarity, not quite understanding what's going on, not knowing what to do about it, feeling kind of helpless around it, feeling like your whole life has changed and you really don't have much control over that. And if you'd like to share feedback in the comments about what your early years of chronic illness were like for you, if you think that can be helpful to others, feel free. If you have questions, post them as well. And stay tuned. If you'd like to check out my website, at this moment in time that I'm recording, I do not have availability to work one-on-one with anyone, but I will be opening some opportunities in the future. My website is AlisonBruner.com. I'm going to be working more with groups in the future, working more with people in helping to heal what's in the shadow, more actually teaching you how to heal yourself. So sign up for my newsletter if you want to hear announcements about all of that, and stay tuned. I will be back, and I'm wishing you so much inner peace, so much self-love, and as much comfort as you can find these days.